Okay, Paul, we are live.
Hello. Happy Super Bowl Monday.
Happy Super Bowl Monday, Monday morning quarterback, social impact style. I love it.
I love it. I think today should be a national holiday. I think all kids should have off from school or at least a 2-hour delay like I think they scheduled in Philly for today.
There were a lot of late parents rolling into Carline this morning. It's only 9:15 in California, so I think we're getting some fallout.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big push. This maybe is a cause-related agenda, but to have the Super Bowl earlier or on a Saturday or the week after, so we've got President's Week holiday and we can all sleep in and not have to drag ourselves out of bed. But I definitely have an unnamed sports beverage because they didn't, pay for this, and lots of coffee, and I'm honored to be with you.
Yeah, and well, I'm happy to promo Coffee Tomo down the street here in West Los Angeles. It's delicious. They definitely didn't pay me, and I love their lattes. All right, should we get rolling? We've got some participants. I think people will continue to trickle in, but would love to just get us started. So, Paul Rieckhoff, thank you for joining us. Can you just tell us a teeny bit about yourself and why you are so overqualified to be having this discussion with me this morning?
Maybe I have two kinds of qualification. First of all, I am a former high school, college, and very semi-pro football player. I've been coaching little guy football, flag football for the last couple of years. So you'll see around me, I've got like my old college helmet, some arts and crafts. I'm rocking a scarf that my son made in Arts and Crafts Day yesterday. And I'm also a Giants fan. So I couldn't not represent for my Giants today. We had a really fun season and didn't turn out the way we wanted, but at least in my view, the Eagles lost, which is upside for Giants fans. So that's part of my qualification. And then for 15 years, I founded and was the CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, one of the leading voices for veterans. And we were really innovative, I think, in the way we advocated on behalf of our community. And a lot of that had to do with commercial media, donated media. We were the recipients of a multi-year ad council campaign, public service announcement campaign that generated over $100 million in donated media, including a pregame spot at the Super Bowl when it was on CBS. I've been to the Super Bowl 3 times, inside twice. Once I was locked out and couldn't get in. But I've been around the Super Bowl and I've been trying to think creatively for almost 2 decades about how to leverage that platform for our cause, for veterans, but also try to advise other causes and charities that are trying to use that platform to generate some good. Amazing.
Well, unlike you, I can't even spell football, never been to a Super Bowl game. But in 2020, I was, at a friend's and we happened to be watching it. And I started seeing these commercials that had some cause content. And as a social impact person for the last 20 years, I found myself like yelling at the TV and saying like, oh, like you missed the landing. Like, why is this ad not better? And as you know, Paul and I have known each other for almost a decade. Yeah. I can't, once I have something in my head, I can't sit on it. So I took it and ran with it. We've been for the last 3 years sharing our Monday morning quarterback social impact edition feedback on the spots. And this year I was really excited to level up and thought about who I would want to have this conversation with to take it live. And you're my number one choice. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. So, and the IAVA spot's amazing. We'll pop it into the link. So just some, good and welfare before we get started. We had kind of thought about sharing the spots with you all live, but we want to keep this to 30 minutes, keep it tight. So we'll be sharing links to the spots that we're talking about in the chat live. We'll do that for about 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up for Q&A for anyone on the line that wants to ask some questions or give their own Monday morning quarterback analysis. We welcome that in the chat as well. And we'll for sure share the IAVA spot that did a tremendous amount to open hearts and minds and wallets to support veterans initiatives, which is amazing. So just to start us off, most watched, TV event in America annually, the most expensive ad spots, and as we talked about kind of leading up to this, more and more, we were seeing a trend that organizations, brands were bringing cause to the forefront in the ads. And what happened this year, Paul? I thought we were like this. I thought we were on a trajectory, and I was wrong. So if you could just kind of tee up where we landed this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think cause was kind of invisible. I feel like maybe everyone's tired of caring so much, or maybe they're exhausted by the pandemic, or they were just so focused on the game, or frankly, maybe it's a sign of where the economy could be going. And when you see companies struggle, some of the first things they cut is marketing, but usually that's only after they cut philanthropy and cause. So I think there may be some macro trends at play here. Somebody said to me, the Super Bowl is not the biggest platform, the World Cup is. And that's true, but the World Cup doesn't stop play to insert commercials, right? And that's what's so unique in my view about the Super Bowl. And you've got arguably the biggest concert of the year jammed in the middle too, with Rihanna, who I thought, by the way, was fabulous. I'm a huge Rihanna fan, and I have no patience for anyone, with any criticism for Rihanna. She was amazing.
P.S. As we found out this morning, pregnant, which makes it even more amazing.
Yeah.
So she's
Pregnant, singing in front of billions, floating up and down over 100,000 people. I mean, it was spellbinding. But I mean, I think that maybe that there's an undertone there too. We're talking about how there weren't maybe overt causes, but that was, I think, an empowering moment for women. It was a moment where people had a discussion about what it meant to be working while you're pregnant. I think those are the conversations that sometimes come out of the Super Bowl that might be unplanned. I mean, I wrote a piece for CNN.com a few weeks ago about the Damar Hamlin injury, which was terribly tragic, but also galvanized the country in a way that, frankly, we haven't seen, especially in this divisive environment where people really were rooting for one person, and it divided, it went across all the divisions of politics and geography and race. Everyone was rooting for this one guy who they could empathize with. So I thought that was really powerful. But I think I was struck, Emily, by the fact that it didn't feel like there were a lot of causes. And it felt like it was jammed in when it was. I've always said that I think that cause marketing is a bit of an oxymoron. Some of the companies do a good job and some do less of a good job. Sometimes it's marketing that's kind of clouded in cause. And when you think it's a great big giveaway, what it really is like a really savvy customer acquisition strategy. And I think we as a nonprofit group, we're really careful about guarding not just our brand, but our community, because people often wanted to cannibalize or what we call camo washing. They'd want to camouflage wash their brand because they knew veterans were popular. I did want to shout out that in the pregame, there was a really good activation on the field for the Pat Tillman Foundation. After the national anthem, before the coin toss, I think it was, they brought out 4 scholars from the Pat Tillman Foundation. They were an organization I partnered with for many years. They do scholarships, and it's named after Pat Tillman, who played for the Arizona Cardinals and was killed serving in the U.S. Army with the Rangers. So I think that was my big takeaway, Emily, is that I didn't feel like people were thinking, frankly, enough about cause. You didn't see anything about Ukraine that I saw, which I think is a really important issue. I didn't see anything about the earthquake. Now, there may have been one that I missed, but I thought maybe there would be more of a push on behalf of the Red Cross or someone else to respond to the earthquake in Turkey and Syria. So it felt like people wanted an escape. It kind of felt like the first real Super Bowl after COVID. And maybe there's a bit of, psychosocial wrapped into that, where the ad folks decided, you know what, we're not going to go big on cause this year. And I think that's unfortunate, but there's still some that we can pick apart, I think.
There's some that we can jump into. And I think, our work here is going to be helping to explain the folks that got it, what could make it better. And, hopefully this can be the playbook for everybody that wants to pick up the cause baton next season. So I did want to start with one that I want to love it. I really, really want to love it, Paul. And it's so close. So, I'm a big food person, have worked on food justice and food waste issues my whole career. Hellman's. So, we'll drop it in the link for all of you on the line. You can have it. But basically, we've got 2 actors who have the name Ham and Brie as part of their names, a big thing of mayo, Pete Davidson coming in, making a delicious sandwich, and there's a hashtag about fighting food waste. And I really love the concept. And it was a really similar concept to the one they landed last year. And there just wasn't enough there for me. I wanted more meat, right? No pun intended. I'm curious how you felt when you saw this ad, and if that hit as a cause ad for you, and kind of what your take on it was.
I'm with you. I had to watch it twice to find the cause part, because it was jammed in at the end like an olive on top of the sandwich or something, right? That maybe didn't fit or felt forced. I've been involved in many campaigns over multi-years, maybe 15 years of everything from web ads to shooting multi-million-dollar commercials. and for brands ranging from, Uber and Google to Victory Motorcycles to Miller Coors Beer. And some of them get it right, and some of them kind of jam it in at the end. And I always emphasize to them, you've got to think about the impact. Like, what is the real impact that our community can feel from this? Do we feel proud of this? Or did it feel like you were just shoving it on there because you had to? And that's really what I felt like, the food waste thing. I don't remember the hashtag, right? Like, I don't remember the campaign. I don't remember what I'm supposed to do. And I think that's really important here. Like, what I remember is like, oh, really? Pete Davidson again? I'm like, okay, like, again, another jam in. And Pete Davidson's like the guy you shove in to go, look, hey, we got Pete Davidson too. And as you know, my wife was an agent at CAA for like 15 years. So I was privy to that sort of this. So Hellman spent probably a couple $1 million on Pete Davidson when they could have, and maybe they did and they just didn't publicize it, donated a couple $1 million to a food waste charity instead.
So perfect pickup on that. We'll do 30 more seconds on Hellman's. The hashtag for everyone watching at home, only because I have it right in front of me, is hashtag make taste, not waste. All about that. No waste. We all know that food waste is a huge issue environmentally. There are over 30 million Americans who are hungry every day. Like, we need to deal with this. Just to like specifically pick it up, what we talk about here at Ethos is needing to have the bedrock down. So I would love Hellman's to take this and then say, hey, this is how we activate and how we support food access across communities. This is how we're ensuring on the grocery store level that food isn't being wasted, and that it's, we're adding to the organizational power to help make sure that these foods are going from the pantries to the food banks. Like, what's the work here? The activation that they plugged, and Feeding America is a great national organization. They're doing this thing where if you see the Hellman's vehicle driving around and you tag it, they're going to make a donation. Like, it's still in the gimmick level. And I love Hellman's, if you're listening, like, call us. We've got free advice. We'll do.
I got some in the fridge here, I'm sure. I mean,
we would love for you to take this from good to great. Hellman's, the world needs you, and let's all heed the call of making taste, not waste, but leveling it up. Okay, next. Do you want to take one, or do you want me to go next?
You can summarize if you want. You can do play-by-play and I'll do color, as we'd say in like the football world, right?
I don't even know what that means, but I like it. I'm in. Yeah. All right, so next I want to go.
I got footballs all over here. I got an extra one for you, Emily. I'll send you one over.
Okay, we'll pretend that I will ever use that. Okay. The next one I wanted to hit was the one burning question, the Estelas, which, when I saw this right out the gate, it's the very first ad that got shown, the first spot. And it was for a conversation around menopause. And I was like, that's bold. I mean, you had sort of talked earlier, Paul, about this kind of being the Super Bowl of the woman. We'll talk about some other spots that touched on sort of women's empowerment. But I thought it was really interesting. Like, number one, it speaks to the viewership, right? Like, there's a lot of women who watch the Super Bowl. And number two, the thing that I thought this ad did really well was link from a spot about a topic that got people's attention to an immediate website activation where people could go and learn more. And the whole point was kind of demystifying, having the ability to have conversations that people aren't having. 1 million women a year are sort of doing something alone that they could be doing together. And while there wasn't like a community-based sort of like lift up impact, like I wasn't sure how this was helping to support women who wouldn't otherwise have access to these resources, that notwithstanding, I thought it did a really good job of saying, here's what we're here to do. We've been really thoughtful. We're going to do a wide lens approach, and we're going to help not just with the Super Bowl ad, but with collateral on the back end, which I thought was pretty cool. And we gave that one higher marks for that reason.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. I think, the key is, can you tell a good story in 30 seconds? And that's hard to do, right? But you want to tell a complete story that also delivers you to somewhere where if you want to find out more information or you want to do something, that it's kind of like a seamless user experience, right? Like a UX or an execution. And I thought that this one, built toward the payoff, which was go to this website, right? And learn more, talk to your healthcare provider. I think it jump-started a conversation that I personally wasn't thinking about, right? That afternoon or that evening. Maybe it generated conversations in living rooms, which is what you want from any kind of a spot, but I think especially a cause related spot. And then, as I used to, counsel all of our corporate partners, you got to make sure the website's good and the website links and the website is ready, and that you're not overtly just trying to snatch their email, that it's actually an informative public awareness education type platform. And I think they did a good job of that.
For sure. And we won't go into the details, but I do think there were other pharma ads that didn't do that at all that could have.
Right.
Not to call anybody out, but things related to diabetes and some other like, issues that really are impacting the nation that could have been like, hey, like we're going to do more than ask people to buy our medicine. And they didn't. So I really liked what they did there. And I think, it's something that anybody who kind of has that framing could do. All right. Flipping over to electric vehicles. We're going to bundle these if that's cool with you, Paul.
Sure. I'm following your lead, but I don't know if we're going to talk about the field goal one or the working with cancer one too. That's a good one.
Yeah, sure. Let's do EV and then we'll go.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay. So, just to touch on it quickly, we had General Motors with a Will Ferrell spot, Jeep with this kind of spot that had to do with going out in nature and seeing cool animals. That was kind of weird, but kind of cool. And then Ram trucks that had this kind of racy, like wink to erectile dysfunction and not being able to go the distance, but don't worry, our cars can plug in for longer and whatever. I don't even know what to say about that one. My attention and it made me laugh, which is something that you like seeing in an ad. In all three of these instances, I thought, the ads were entertaining. You understood that they were about electric vehicles. You understood that there was something connected, maybe loosely to the environment, but none of them actually explicitly said, hey, polar ice caps are melting. We actually really need y'all to do your part. And everybody who drives, this is something that you can do as you make your decision about your next car. And maybe kind of going back to the top of the call, America doesn't want to hear that right now. America doesn't want to be lectured. America doesn't want bad news, sad news. But I thought, GM specifically last year did a spot that was so much better that took kind of the rational brain and said, hey guys, like, we're not asking, this is really important. Like, we need you. We don't want you. And this year it was all just kind of like, hey, electric vehicles. Cool. And that was a miss for me, but I'd love to hear what you think.
I think there were a couple of big winners of the Super Bowl ad time, right? And I think Jesus is one. We'll talk about that a little later on, right? And then there's always Scientology. Scientology is always going to do a big buy, which I think, is something for us to actually talk about, right? Like it's a really, I would argue, smart strategy, right? Especially if you're trying to ensure relevance and religion is in the crosshairs, right? But beyond, Jesus, which I think was a big feature, EV, like all things EV. But I think I want to frame it a little bit differently and say, it wasn't a cause for me this time. It was about American brands, especially saying we have awesome cars and we have new cars. We're competitive in this landscape. There's always been a connection between football and cars. It's very much about the American identity and that masculine, adventurous spirit. And, car ads are usually the biggest ones in the Super Bowl. It's when you see the new whatever. And it's almost always a new whatever American car. I think we'll talk about Kia a little bit later, which took a different approach, but you're talking about GM, Ram, and Jeep. They want to show that American cars look good, sound good, and can compete with a combustion engine car. I think that's the big takeaway. And they don't have to sell it as hard, but they also shouldn't like BS it and say it's charity. It's not charity. It's business now. And they're trying to pivot and say, we can compete with electric cars. They make financial sense for you and your family. And by the way, they're super cool and they look great. And now I think for the first time in a while, American cars can actually make that argument. They look great. And they got Will Ferrell, right? I mean, you can't go wrong with Will Ferrell. You're always going to get attention. And touches on the budget. I mean, that's a subset of this. But if we were going to break them apart, celebrity talent costs a lot of money. And Will Ferrell, I don't know, 10, 20, $50 million for just that spot. He could command that kind of money. And that's something that, a car company can spend if they're putting all their investments into a big Super Bowl spot.
Maybe that's the good news. Maybe, electric vehicles they're so mainstream, it's not cause attached anymore and the world will be saved. I like that.
I didn't see any Tesla ads. I mean, I don't know if there were one. There was one that I missed.
But on in the stands though, so maybe next year.
Yeah.
All right, Paul, you're next. What do you want? What do you want to pick up?
I actually would love to talk about the field goal ad, the working with cancer one. Can we talk about that one?
Let's do it.
Do you want to describe it and I can react to it, or
yeah,
you do a good summary, I thought.
Totally. The Publicis Group, usually these ads are direct to consumer product ads, right? Like their cars, their chips, their beer. This is a company that's a holding company. I don't know if anybody knew Publicis. I had to Google them, frankly, like who they were before the ad. And basically they have, put together a cohort that includes, Google, McDonald's, Toyota, Walmart, and they had this cause-based activation. It only aired regionally, by the way. So if you're East Coast viewer, you saw this. If you're a West Coast viewer, we've got the YouTube link for you. But basically, they want to normalize people who are working through cancer diagnoses and cancer treatment, and all of the things that come with that, physically, emotionally, and bring that into normalizing that for the workplace. And I thought that was a really, you said this, these ads aren't cheap. The fact that they chose to spend their Super Bowl spot dollars in this way, I think is really purposeful. And their whole point was, we want to change people's perspectives, and we're going to bring this to the biggest show of the year. And I think they changed some hearts and minds with this ad. I think it was really powerful. Curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think it was a touchdown. I think it was maybe the biggest touchdown of the game. I worked a lot in the mental health space around veterans, as you know. And our ad that ran, I think it was 2011 when the Saints were in the Super Bowl. Our ad ran in the pregame, and the reason why it ran was because there was a guy at CBS whose dad was a World War II vet, and he said, "You know what? I'm going to fight for you, and I'm going to get a 30-second spot donated." And CBS donated a 30-second spot to a charity, which doesn't happen very often, but it happened because there were people inside who felt our mission and who cared about veterans and cared about our agenda to destigmatize mental health. So the Super Bowl can be a great platform to destigmatize. And I think that even Rihanna, again, we're trying to destigmatize what women can do when they're pregnant. I think that's a takeaway. But this one was important because, again, from the veteran space, we have a lot of folks who are struggling with cancer, who are facing cancer. From Agent Orange exposures, we've got Vietnam vets. And this summer, we passed some groundbreaking legislation. Folks may remember Jon Stewart was on the Hill in Washington fighting for it because so many veterans were exposed to toxins and now they have cancer, much like after 9/11. So talking about cancer and normalizing a discussion around cancer is really hard to do. And this ad said, hey, you have people at work who may be fighting cancer and you need to support them. This is a part of everybody's culture. And I think the takeaway was something like 50% of Americans will have cancer at some point. That stuck with me. Like they said, at some point, half of Americans will have some kind of cancer, and that could be someone it could be someone you work with. So normalizing that conversation, I think, is really hard to do. And it was also just a beautiful spot. You have to work really hard to tell a story well that's emotional and hard. And I think they nailed it.
Awesome. You convinced me.
Yeah, think about it. Like, I think this is a good takeaway. Like, have you ever thought about that or talked about that before? Right? And among your friends, your colleagues, your family, and maybe folks have if they have faced cancer. But if you haven't, and this jumpstarts a conversation, I think that's a big win for any cause and any brand. And this is going to benefit the entire cancer fighting community, not just those brands associated with it. And also, like, it didn't make me remember one brand in particular, which I think is a good thing for the cause. It wasn't like, go buy this. It was just, hey, let's have this national conversation. And I think at a time when HR issues and workplace development and workplace respect is so important, I think it was very timely.
Sure. And you live that, like, you work with HR groups and, think about how to create inclusive communities. And so, this can maybe be beneficial. I'm sure there's meetings that are happening today all over America where people are talking about this and how they're going to bring it into work.
I think some people will feel empowered, right? Like, and it gives them a reference point. You can say, hey, did you ever see that Super Bowl commercial? That's me, that's my mom, that's my brother, whatever. I think that's really powerful. And you can always refer to a Super Bowl commercial because you kind of assume everybody saw it. And if they didn't, they're going to kind of pretend they saw it. And it creates this national conversation.
After the meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm looking at the clock. We're in the fourth quarter. I want to hit Kia. I want to hit the religion ads. And then I want to bring it home with the NFL ad with, Billie Jean King that rocked my world.
Okay. Which one you want to do first? In that order?
Let's do Kia. I want to shout out.
Kia. Okay. So Kia, big shout out to my friend and mentor, David Angelo. He is the CEO and founder of David and Goliath, which is one of the ad agencies that does a lot of great social impact. They were the pro bono agency of record for Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans America and for Homeboy Industries and other causes. I also want to give a shout out BBDO, Saatchi & Saatchi, Razorfish. These are firms that donate their services pro bono through the Ad Council. And for us, that was like a couple $1 million worth of work. Like, we never could have afforded an ad agency and put together these ads, and they covered everything for our cause. So I encourage everybody to check out the Ad Council. They've been doing this since TV has been around. But when it comes to Kia, I thought that this was like one of the great ads, period. Like, I'm a dad of 2 little boys. My 4-year-old, he will be 4 next month, at the end of this month, was on a binky till like 6 months ago. And it was like his thing. And if I lost the binky, all hell broke loose. So I've been under the bed, I've been in the couch. I mean, looking for that one binky and then putting it through the dishwasher to make sure it doesn't poison him. You know, I've gone into delis at like 4 a.m. Do you please have a pacifier, right? So I've been that guy. And I think many parents have been that guy or that gal who's had to deal with it. So I thought it was a really sweet and powerful ad. I thought it was fun. And the car looks great too. So to my friend David, it doesn't hurt when I think Kia's new cars look pretty awesome. And I'm a car guy, so I'm happy to say if it doesn't look like Kia used to. So when you can put those things together, and also really important, making parenting cool and making being a concerned dad and an involved dad cool. We still are breaking a lot of barriers around that. And a lot of dads have stepped up, especially during COVID. And I want to celebrate that to all my fellow dads out there.
100%. I just wanted to pick up that note. Like, I'll just say ditto. The fact that dad was centered as the binky finder, I was like, I mean, and my husband is an amazing binky finder, but I don't know that that's the norm for Super Bowl watching, America. And I thought that was great. And then the other thing, I think that was a perfect example. We talk about how like this year's ads really trended toward hugs. Like, that was a hug. It was just like, oh,
Yeah.
like he's got it. And so I do think that ad hits perfectly on kind of where the American psyche is. And I think we can learn from that. That's kind of
And they made it iconic. Like, Binky Dad is now going to be a thing, right? Like, and if you can make something iconic, a hashtag we remember, like, shit, like, I'm sorry, but that's big. Like, that's really, really hard to do. Like, I used to talk about pandemic parenting, and there's a whole genre around that. And Binky Dad is like forever. So that's a touchdown.
All right. Well, when you get t-shirts made, we definitely want one. At our house. Okay, cool. You and I were chatting about this ahead of time, and you were just like, there are 2 ads that just kind of like got me, and I want to give you the baton to kind of speak to those. Usually we're focusing on brands and companies and folks that are selling products. These were ads about religion, right? Like, they're not looking for your money; they're looking for your heart. They want you in the parish. So let's talk about those 2.
Yeah, I mean, I think football fans know that Scientology usually does a big ad buy every Super Bowl, right? And it's always like you can kind of feel it by the music. You're not sure if it's like, frankly, if it's like a sci-fi film, if it's some kind of like vacation, and then you're like, oh, it's the Scientology ad, right? That's my reaction as somebody who's watched every Super Bowl forever, right? And so, again, conversation generation, a positive image for Scientology. Like, if I'm on their team, I'm thinking, all right, this is a good takeaway. They probably have metrics on web traffic or new members or donations. And they keep doing it every year, so it must be worth it. I think on the other side of things, there were these ads. I've been seeing them during football, if you watch football, where they're very powerful, very big images, very emotional. And there were, the 2 themes. The first one, I think, was love, and the other one was hate. And I think they were 60-second ads, which is like a double buy, that much more expensive. So a lot of money. And the first one was very loving. And you're not sure if it's going to be a Red Cross ad or what is it going to be. And at the end, it's like, Jesus loved all of us. And you're like, oh, and like people react on all forms of spectrum. But again, a massive generation of conversation. The other one was about hate. And it was these images of people screaming at each other and fighting, and like these January 6th images. And I was watching it with my kids. I think it was like right at the end of the 4th quarter when the game was close. And I watched my little boys, they're 7 and 3, and they were scared. And I think that's important to note. Like, they made their point to adults, but it was really angry images, and it was in direct contrast to so much of the friendly hug stuff you saw throughout the Super Bowl. And the end was, I think, Jesus loved his enemies too, or something, or Jesus loved his enemies was the tagline, which was very impactful, makes the point. But I think you have to ask, at what cost? And I think it's still a family program. And for me, I always look at my little boys and what's their visceral, emotional reaction. I think it scared them. And I don't think I didn't love that. So
I'll say ditto to that one. I mean, we also were watching with our kids. My husband and I looked at each other after the ad and we're like, ooh, like that. They went there. Like, that was intense. So, I do think though people are talking about it today, which was the goal,
Yep.
the goal of spending the money and relevant. Okay. I want to take us to, what I thought was a touchdown. I'm curious to hear what you're thinking about it. NFL did a spot that was called Run With It. And it featured Diana Flores. And I have to be honest, I didn't know about her flag football prowess until last night, but now I feel an expert. I'm going to buy a sweatshirt. She's amazing. So, she plays in Mexico. She's running through this like ridiculous star-studded ad. At one point, people are trying to like tag her and get her flags off. Billie Jean King opens a car door to block the bunch of guys.
Right.
Like, so rad, like sports feminist icon. And then it finishes with this kind of crazy apex, and it says, to the women pushing football forward, we can't wait to see where you take this game. End scene. I was like, NFL, you thought about this one. I thought it was impactful. I definitely feel like we're talking about it. I don't know if it just like hit my like Emily notes. Curious what you think, Paul.
So I'm a bit of a cynic because so I've met with the NFL. I've counseled the NFL. I met with Roger Goodell once in the NFL office to talk about the national anthem protest. He asked me to come in and talk about how the veterans community was feeling at the time when he and Trump were kind of doing battle over the national anthem. And I think we have to remember that the NFL is also a multi-billion-dollar corporation. And I think we always have to ask, when you talk about philanthropy, what is your percentage of your overall net worth, your overall market cap? Like, it may sound like a lot when you say, oh, $10,000 for the first 5 people. But if you have a market cap of $1 billion, that's infinitesimal. So I think there's one thing for me, which is the NFL has to reposition itself, right? It has to reposition itself around head injuries. It has to reposition itself around domestic violence. There have been many high-profile incidents of domestic violence the NFL hasn't handled well. And they have to try to talk about expansion. So there's a couple things. Number one, flag football is probably the future for football, for men and women, because kids aren't playing football because of head injuries. I coach flag football. My boys probably, if they do hit, won't hit till they're 12 or 14, right? So that's a big change. Women's flag football is on fire. California this week has sanctioned now high school flag football for women. New York has done it. I think there are 7 states, so it's doubling. And I think flag football for the younger kids is going to be huge, and especially for women. So I think it's leveled that playing field. And as I mentioned to you in the warm-up, they picked Flores, probably not accidentally, because the NFL wants to expand it to Mexico. They do an exhibition game in Mexico. There's a lot of talk about how Mexico City will probably be an expansion team in the next couple of decades. So the NFL is making a really important conversation, but it's also got its own interests in mind. And that's kind of always the NFL. They're always touching on something, and they have really good ads and really powerful story. And I love the Billie Jean King part, but it's also in their self-interest. They've got to figure out what the future of the NFL looks like. And, little boys aren't playing football. But over time, a generation from now, more little girls might be playing flag football than boys are. And that might be the future for the NFL.
I mean, listen, I'll say, I played field hockey, which only existed in high schools across the United States. And I played at UCLA for a bit too in colleges because of Title IX, right? So and I'm not that old, right? So everything that you said, I totally agree. There's a ton of self-interest from the NFL, and the fact that the National Football League spent their spot, their time, their money promoting women in sport. If you would have told somebody even 15 years ago that was going to happen, it would be like, you're crazy. So everything you said, for sure. And I do think this shows momentum. And this goes back to your point at the beginning, which was this may have been the year of the women.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
And viewership among women is high too. I think that's misunderstood. Like, women watch football, they love football. And also I think Erin Andrews, I think it was doing the interview in the beginning, and Clarissa, there are 2 really great women broadcasters who are breaking barriers. They also have a great podcast that I'd recommend. But women in the booth, women broadcasting, women calling games, women referees are now happening in the NFL. And I think that's really important and trailblazing too.
Totally. And, just to wrap it on your point, it's not the ad alone. It's what they do the other 364 days a year. So I think that's going to be the proof is in the pudding. Like, what NFL are you doing? How are you putting your capital, your time, your star power into integrating women into sport, in football, and generally? And the proof will be in that pudding all year long. And maybe you'll coach some girls this year because of that ad. Paul, I don't know.
I had some. You can see it back here. We had a small team, but there were 2. It was a co-ed team 2 years ago, and And the two girls on my team were the best players on the whole team. Our quarterback was fantastic, and she was like a Patrick Mahomes type quarterback. She was amazing. And so, yeah.
Amazing. I love it. All right. Well, we're past our 30 minutes. Clearly, I would love to do this again next year. We'll bucket more time. We'll schedule more time. I think Paul and I are happy to stay on if folks need to drop. If anybody has any questions, you want to pop them in, we can stay for another few minutes. This has been so fun, and hopefully some of these tips will help put the cause in cause marketing a little bit stronger for our friends who are on the ad side.
Yes, and before you know it, it'll be baseball season in the baseball playoffs and hockey playoffs and basketball playoffs. I'm an F1 fan. That'll be coming back, and it'll be expanding into the U.S. So we'll have plenty of other sports we can talk about, and we can also. I think it's important to challenge these brands and get them to do more, because they are so influential and they can make such an impact. And I think I want to give one shout out, if I can, Emily. The one piece of the NFL that doesn't get enough credit is the Walter Payton Man of the Year award. And they gave it to Dak Prescott, the quarterback of the Cowboys. I'm not a Cowboys fan, but I am a fan of Dak Prescott and him doing well. And that's their like good citizen award. And they honored him on the field, I think before the kickoff. And that was really important too. And they've elevated the Walter Payton Man of the Year award. And you'll see, I think it's on their jerseys and maybe on their helmet, there's a Walter Payton icon of him with like a big jacket on. And only the Walter Payton Man of the Year recipients can wear that on their jerseys, and they wear it for their career. So look for that next time you're watching a game, and you'll see it on Dak Prescott's uniform next year.
Amazing. And I don't put you on the spot. Do you know kind of what he's doing to have warranted that kind of amazing honor?
Yeah, he's done a lot in the community for youth, and he gave an amazing. The NFL Honors was Thursday night, and he gave an amazing speech about his mother. And about how his mother really was formative in his approach. And, I think a lot of, the NFL obviously gets sensationalized and the attention is warranted around some of their more violent and problematic issues. But most of the players are doing a lot and are really philanthropic, and most of the teams are very philanthropic. And I think that, Dak Prescott was an example of one of those guys. Everybody talks about his play, but they don't know about his philanthropy. And Damar Hamlin's a great example. Nobody knew what Damar Hamlin did in his community until he got hurt. And now his charity has really grown, and that might be his future much more than football.
I mean, the world would be better if that were true, right?
Yeah.
Do you have a question? What do you think will happen next year? More cause or less?
I think less. I mean, I'm sorry, but I think it's true. Like, I think what I'm seeing in the broader market for philanthropy and for marketing is that budgets are getting cut. A lot of companies are tightening up. We've all seen the layoffs in the technology space and others. And I think the real other side of this is oftentimes companies cut cause, they cut fellowships, they cut stuff that folks may not notice or that they view as extra or not core to their business. And I think that's actually bad for cause. It's also bad for business. I think that philanthropy is core to good business and will make your company more successful across the board. But I think some companies are a bit more short-sighted. There's also always the opportunity of a crisis, right? If there's a hurricane, if there's a disaster, especially in the US, that can dominate a Super Bowl, like when we had Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy, things like that. But I do unfortunately think if I had to make a prediction, if I had to make a bet, my son is betting that it will be the Giants and the Dolphins next year. And I am betting that there'll be a little less cause.
All right. I wrote a piece in Forbes that came out about a month ago saying, hey, there's, economic cool down coming. Don't put cause on the chopping block. Here's why. So I'll say, I think, I couldn't agree with you more. It's a bad business decision, let alone, has a chilling effect on the social sector, which none of us want. So if you're listening at home, don't do that. Figure out how to keep being impactful. And
I'm always going to challenge billionaires and say, hey, any billionaire, you can buy a 30-second spot for Save the Children. You can buy a 30-second spot for whatever your cause is. And I'm actually surprised that hasn't happened. And a part of this actually that you can count on is next year there will be more political ads, because the presidential campaign will be ramping up. So locally, you'll see more political ads, and probably on the Super Bowl, that might be a place for a presidential candidate or candidates to make a buy and make a splash.
And, I like to take the counterpoint. So I'm going to say cause will be back on the rise next year, just because that's where I want it to be. I'm voting with my feet.
It was like last night. I was, my heart was rooting for the Chiefs, but I had my money on the Eagles. I'm glad that I was wrong about the latter.
Okay. All right, deal. Okay, and just for fun, favorite spot, cause or otherwise, and then we'll wrap. I know you said you love Kia. Is that going to stick for you?
No, my favorite spot was actually the one that did a twist on you, where it was about the dog during the pandemic. And I was watching, I'm getting goosebumps because my kids and my wife and I were on the couch, we're watching, I don't know if you saw it. The family's all together during the pandemic and the dog is there. And then the pandemic ends and the family leaves and the dog's by himself or herself and ripping apart the house. And they go, I think it might've been an Amazon ad. They go on Amazon and buy a crate. And my son was like, oh no, they're gonna give the dog away, Dad. And then it turns out, no, they actually bought a crate and gave the dog a friend. And there's 2 dogs. That was my favorite ad. I love it. And I don't even know who it was for. I think it was Amazon, but it ended in a happy place after almost crushing the hearts of my little boys.
That was a total good one. I'll say, I'm a huge Steve Martin fan. I can't explain it. I just think he's so great. And I don't like soda. I'm sorry, Pepsi. You're not my thing. But I thought those Pepsi ads were super clever. You got Ben Stiller doing Zoolander, and maybe it's kind of that nostalgia. I'm the demographic. Oh my God. It's just these faces, these comedians that you love, that are doing their thing and being over the top. And that just kind of felt good to watch. And I thought they did a really good job sequencing those throughout the Super Bowl. And I laughed out loud every time. So there you go.
100%. Maybe Steve Martin will run for president and then we'll see the both the same. And I have to, Emily, if I don't get a chance, I just want to thank you and your team for all you do. You have been a real leader in the philanthropic space in all the causes you've worked with, but also you've been a mentor and a role model for many of us in the nonprofit space and in the cause space. And I just want to thank you for all your service to so many causes and for your leadership and for your example.
I mean, you're too much. Right back at you. Thank you. We don't have it. This is another webinar, but the amount of good that Paul Rieckhoff has done in the world is not something we could fit in 30 seconds. And you're just a total rock star. As I would say, you're a mensch among mensch.
Which we're not supposed to say anymore. Did you remember that?
No.
We're not supposed to call people rock stars anymore. I like that one too. Because you know why I like that one? You know why I like that one? This is actually subtle. Gary Clark Jr. They put Gary Clark Jr. in, who is a rock star and doesn't get, he's kind of like, he used to be on the fringes, now get like, everybody, I know most of America was like, who's that guy with the hat? And like, some people had to Google it, the younger person had to be like, that's Gary Clark Jr. They knew who Paul Staley was from Kiss. They knew who Ozzy was, right? But Gary Clark Jr. is awesome. And I have a strong recommendation. If you can see Gary Clark Jr. live, go do it. He's the greatest guitarist living on the planet.
Amazing. Perfect way to end. I'm going to go put on some Gary Clark Jr. And it was so fun to chat, Paul. I really appreciate the time. Hope everybody at home enjoyed and would love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you for having me. And great season, everybody. Good job. It's hard. It's going to be so long till football's back, but I do think it's a unique time that brings a lot of people together. It doesn't bring everybody together. It can be divisive at times, but it's also great to have, one of the few shared experiences we have as Americans is that whole thing that is the Super Bowl. So maybe we can keep some of that Super Bowl spirit for the rest of the year.
Amen.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Go Giants. Go Giants.